candidates, and so once again I'll be asking you for your background, because you've been outlining your background for during the last campaign. But what is your journey, David? How did you get here and start running for office?
Well, I'll give the short bio first, and then get to the question of why I'm running for office. Professionally, I have a PhD in economics. I started out teaching at a university, then discovered that my temperament and my skills were much more useful in working on public policy. So I came to Washington, spent a long time there, rose to some pretty senior positions in government. I was Deputy Assistant Secretary of Energy, I was Assistant Director of the Congressional Budget Office, and then I left government service, went into consulting, and I retired from that Senior Vice President of NERA Economic Consulting, a big consulting firm, in 2014.
Well, of course, the ultimate question on the Eastern Shore is where were you born and where did you come from? So back up.
I will back up a little bit. I was born in Philadelphia. Grew up there. Went to college in New England. Moved around a bit, but ended up in the Washington, D.C. area where I was until we started coming down here, and then until we lived here full time. So we've been here part-timers for coming up on 30 years, and have lived here full time for about 10. I've lived in Easton for 4 years.
What was the decision? Why did you make the decision to move full time?
We'd spent a good bit of time trying to decide where it was that we wanted to retire, and my retirement kept being put off a little bit, but I knew it was coming up. And as I said, we'd been living here for, at that point, 20 years or so, and knew that the house we were living in then was not one we were going to live in full time. So we had to make a commitment, and we realized that this is the place where we had built friendships, that it was a place where we had opportunities for service, that it was a community that we loved, and then on top of it, it's just a very special place in terms of the Easton in particular, being a small town in a rural environment, fields around us that we can get to very quickly, woodlands for all sorts of interesting activities, magnificent body of water nearby. So who would not want to live here?
And you're a sailor too, right?
I was, yes, for a long time.
Yeah.
Then finally it got to the point that I just didn't want to walk out on the bow anymore to untangle that jib, so we hung it up.
You know, when you look back on your career, what do you think of some of your accomplishments? What do you want to highlight, as they say?
I think what I would want to highlight is that all through that I was basically giving advice to decision makers. I was in the policy office in the Department of Energy, worked in the office of the Secretary of Defense. When I was in the Congressional Budget Office, we were taking up assignments from congressional committees, giving them advice, and it was always in terms of essentially, here are decisions that the policymakers are facing, and what will the consequences be if the decision is made one way? What will the consequences be if the decision is made another way? And that was pretty much what I did when I went into consulting. I'm very proud of the group that I built, which really at some points was, I think, pretty much ahead of everyone in our ability to give, kind of an objective and quantitative answer about some thorny questions like what will it cost to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or what are the impacts of Trump's tax policy going to be. And I got to know and work with some of the top management of some of the world's biggest energy companies. I enjoyed doing that. Sometimes I was serving the courts as an expert witness. But always in all of this, what I was doing was giving advice to somebody else. Yeah. And that kind of gets me back to your first question, which is that I think through all of that, I felt that I was increasingly The advice was being ignored because decisions were being made more and more in Washington on a purely political basis. So one of my goals when I retired from consulting and was free was to write on my own about what I thought about various issues and policies. You gave me a start writing for the Talbot Spy. Then we set up our own journal called the Chesapeake Observer. But I was still, at that point, if you like, giving people advice. I was offering my opinions and suggestions about things. And I finally realized that if I was actually going to accomplish anything with what I think are some useful skills and experience, I was going to have to get in the game myself.
Yeah, and you did. I mean, and you ran for Talbot County Council.
Yes.
I think you lost by a couple of votes.
Yes, right.
And you were running on what I would call a land protection platform, among other things.
Yes.
But it's hard to get into the arena. It's harder sometimes to go back to the arena.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of curious about why you decided that you wanted to remain, involved in politics and local government.
I ask myself the same question every day. It's for exactly the same reasons that you described. It's about protection of the land and protection of the special character of the place that we live. One of the things I learned on the county council is that most of the important decisions that will decide our future here are actually made in the towns, not in the county. That is, decisions about land use and growth, if we focus on that particular topic. They're made in the towns. And that right now, I think the town of Easton, where I now live, is facing some really critical decisions about new development. And that I want to offer my expertise and my point of view in order to try to influence them to go in the right direction.
You know, the Spy did do a survey of Easton challenges and issues, and growth did become the number one concern.
Yeah.
And of course, there are a lot of definitions of what growth is. There's good growth, there's smart growth, there's bad growth.
Yes.
But let's clear something up. You do assume that Easton will grow, yes?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I assume that it will grow. I don't think it has to grow, but I believe it will. That it's a great place to live. People are going to want to come here. People would like to have their children live here. So I do expect it to grow. The question is how it grows, where, when, and with what design.
Yeah.
And so I prefer to use the phrase sensible growth, because it hasn't yet been preempted by anyone else. And by sensible growth, I mean growth that, first of all, just describing it physically, preserves Easton's character as a small town. And it's a small town that is located in a rural area. You know, we're surrounded by open field, by farm fields, by woodlands, all the other things I mentioned. The second thing I mean by sensible growth is it's growth that actually enhances the quality of life for those who live here already. I don't think we should not be thinking about growing in ways that actually diminish the quality of life of those who are here already.
I guess this corresponds very easily with the second most important issue facing Easton, and that is affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is this challenge of balancing the desire for, I forgot your phrase, but reasonable growth, and the stark limits that we have in terms of workforce housing, young professional housing, as well as other forms. I mean, how do you in your own mind work through those challenges?
Well, my first observation is that the lack of, what you describe as the lack of certain kinds of housing, low cost, houses that can be afforded by someone who's earning $30,000 to $50,000 a year, or another set that could be owned by a professional who's more up in the $80,000 a year range. They do exist, but not all of them. But it's driven not by choices we make here, it's driven by the market. And the market that makes it difficult to find affordable housing here is one that simply makes land values so high because so many people want to come here. And that is a very difficult thing for any government to try to work against. And so if we think about affordable housing, there are ways to do it, but they all have to be paid for by someone. I would say we haven't had a whole lot of success with convincing developers that they should build affordable housing rather than things that they're going to make more profit on. Easton Village bought its way out of its requirement to build affordable housing there.
Explain that to people, because I think that's an important example.
Okay, you're right. Not everyone knows that. When Easton Village was conceived, there were going to be space set aside for affordable housing. I don't know whether it was apartments or particular kinds of townhouses. But then as they continued designing it, they said, offered the town, how about if we give you a sum of money that you can use for rehabilitation and renovation of the part within the town of Easton, and let us off from our requirement to build it right here. And it was accepted. Not necessarily a bad thing, because actually I would say that if we're going to think about affordable housing, we should be looking in the core of Easton, in the downtown area, where there are ample opportunities for infill housing, where the higher density would not be inconsistent or incongruent with the neighborhoods that it's going up around. And so I would tend to focus there. But it's going to mean that either charitable organizations or the town government or some other source of grants is going to have to pay the difference between the market value of that land and the cost of building those houses and what the audience is that we want to serve with it. So we can't just say affordable housing and have it appear. The second thing is, there are two kinds of affordable housing. One is cheap housing, that is housing that is small dwelling units built inexpensively with inexpensive appliances, and that are basically worth what you pay for. Even that's tough to do here with the regulatory requirements about things like sprinkler systems, etc., and the value of land, but that's one way to do it. The other one is simply to say, okay, we're going to pay, this housing will be sold at below market prices. Well, then you have to decide, who do you want to give it to? Do you want to give it to police officers to attract police officers to actually take a job in Easton, live in Easton? Do you want to give it to school teachers? Do you want to give it to doctors? There are plenty of claimants, and it has to be, in that case, rationed by somebody. That's going to be some sort of a housing bureaucracy that we don't right now have. And so I'm not troubled by the fact that a whole lot of workers commute into Easton from Caroline County, say. It's a reasonably short commute by most standards. They're finding land that's cheaper, houses that are cheaper and bigger there. They drive into work, they drive home. That's the way every urban area works. And so there's some things that, so I think we really need to think through very carefully what our purpose is in affordable housing, whether there are other ways of achieving the goal, for example, of keeping police officers an opportunity to live in the community, and how much we can accomplish with that without, again, doing something like Poplar Hill is proposing to do, which is completely out of scale with any of the surrounding neighborhoods.
I guess the other thing we ask all the candidates is, what are you bringing to the table? What are the differentials and skill sets that you would bring to this kind of responsibility?
Well, I'm an economist. As I described, I've been giving decision makers policy advice for more years than I would want to admit. And that gives me, I think, both the training and the experience to deal with some of the most important issues that we're facing here in the county. I mean, leaving aside growth, we have some real financial challenges ahead of us. We have a AA bond rating that we want to keep. That means we're going to have to budget carefully, avoid borrowing to cover current expenditures, to scrutinize programs carefully, to make sure that the council members actually know what new proposals are going to cost, and then ask the question of, is that worth it? Are there better ways we could be spending our money? That's what I've spent many decades doing in government and in the private sector. I've dealt with budgets at the in the policy office at the Department of Energy, in program analysis at the Department of Defense, at the Congressional Budget Office. So I know how a well-run budget process works. Second, I have been involved in tax policy in thinking about, what are the least burdensome ways of raising taxes if it has to be done. I have, in my consulting experience, worked on issues of economic growth and even economic growth at the local level. I am trying in looking carefully at claims that business or residential development is going to lower taxes and such benefits to the community. Well, I've worked carefully on those things, and I think I bring a level of understanding of how development will affect the local community and especially the revenues and costs of the town government. And so both that training and experience, I think, is unique. It's not unique here in Talbot County. Lots of my neighbors would probably be better at it than I am, but none of them have offered themselves to run for this office.
Yeah. This is your chance to catch up on things that you wanted to talk about, or maybe people don't understand. Maybe you have a position on dog parks. I don't know. But what can we close this with on your?
Well, there are a couple of other important issues for I think that I'm a very strong supporter of our local police. Joe Gamble endorsed me, Sheriff Joe Gamble, for the county council election. I think we need to work hard for all of our public safety personnel in Easton to provide an attractive compensation package so that we can fill our vacancies and keep the best people. I think one particular thing, I really think that Oxford and St. Michael's are on the right track with their moratorium on marijuana dispensaries. I would make that an important part of public safety and public health. I know we're going to have to be dealing with a failing healthcare system for a long time, since it seems our hospital is once again backed up to the beginning stages of thinking about what they should be building someday. But we have immediate needs that I think all levels of government in the county need to figure out ways to address. But I think what I'd really wrap up with is going back to one of your very first questions, that Esther and I really value the community that we have found here, that it's the physical environment is unsurpassed, but the kind of friendships that we have developed, the opportunities for community service, the just extraordinary level of charity and help for your neighbor that occurs all through the county are just extraordinary and unmatched anywhere we've been. And a large part of that has to do with the fact that we are still small enough that we can get to know a large number of our neighbors. Yeah. And the other thing I have to say is nobody's going to want to live here with the level of traffic congestion that we will see if all of these developments go ahead.
Yeah. Well, thank you, David, for caring enough to run for office.
Thank you.